So please continue to enjoy your lunch and I want to, again, welcome everyone to our Laureate Luncheon. For some of you who think, oh, this is the last event, no. The Global Youth Institute is this afternoon. Dr. Borlaug always said his most favorite part of the entire week. The inspiration continues. But this is a kind of culminating point when we honor our laureates, present them their diplomas and their check. And we'll be up to do that shortly. But first, I want to ask, again, John and Janice Ruan are here. John and Janice, you stand up so we can thank you again for your wonderful sponsorship. And come on, stand up. Yeah. Hey, thank you. President Obasanjo, so wonderful of you to be with us and grace us with your presence. Your background, your prestige lends so much dignity and status to our events. Thank you again. Please join with me in thanking President Obasanjo. Please stand up so we can recognize you. Yep. Okay. One of our laureates is over having a surgical operation. We're having his microphone attached to him. I think next year when you arrive at the airport, we're going to hook you up with a mic and we'll just keep it on all week. But this is a time I certainly hope all of you who have been here and so many of you have said to me, wow, this is great. It's so well organized and we've been treated so well. And that means so very much to me. And the credit gets directed to me, but the credit really belongs to all of the individuals who come together and make up our team. So I'm always telling everyone how small our team is. It's only 10 individuals on it, but we are multiplied exponentially by those who assist us in coming back. So we have our docents. These are volunteers all through the year. They guide people through the Hall of Laureates. And then when it comes time for our week, we mobilize them into a battalion. So we have a battalion of docents. They're over here. Docents, can you stand up so we can thank you? They're so incredible, and they're always showing me up because they know something about the building that I don't know or I've forgotten on that. But I'm so proud of them. Thank you so much. Then we have a process when students come intern for us, individuals. They work for us. When they leave, we have a formal ceremony, and they are inducted into the Reserve Corps. And when you're in the World Food Prize Reserve Corps, it's like being on military duty. You're in the Army Reserve or the Air Force Reserve, and on your certificate it says, subject to recall to active duty in October. And we recall them. And so here we have members of our Reserve Corps. Where are you, Reserve Corps? Stand up. Not here, yes. There's more than two of them. Here, come on. Most of them are out in the hall still working on that. And then beyond that, we have volunteers who are here. Kate Benisiak recruits volunteers. All the drivers, people are working. Volunteers who are here, stand up. Thank you so much to our volunteers. Yeah. Then we have our current George Washington Carver interns who are here. These are college students. They come and work with us for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. Some of them come back. People are like Lainey Bourgeois, who's working for me. She flies in, just every year for a week, takes off from school at Texas A&M, and other flying in from Georgia, and like Bian Lee flew in from Singapore to be here. And our George Washington Carver interns who are here. So stand up if you're here, and if not, they're out in the hall, so let's thank them as well. Okay. So I think I've got everybody there except for the World Food Prize staff who are here. So this is a group of 10 staff members, the professional staff who work year-round. What is it? Either you can be the jerk in charge or you can work for the jerk in charge, as we heard this morning. So they're the ones who work for the jerk in charge, but all of this couldn't happen without their planning, all of their incredible hard work. Where's the World Food Prize professional staff? Stand up, wave your hand so people see you. My special assistant, Abby Johnson. Where's Abby? There's Abby over here. She wasn't here. Yesterday was her birthday. I made her work on her birthday, and I wished her happy birthday, but she wasn't here. So happy day after your birthday, Abby. That's on that. Who have I forgotten? That's it. So please continue to enjoy your lunch. And then we'll have our program right after. We'll present our diplomas and the money. And I know this, we got David Nabarro and Lawrence Haddad's attention here at last. And then I'll back up and hope that you like the menu and lunch we picked out, especially with them in mind. So welcome, enjoy your lunch. I'll be back before you know it. So, wait, I forgot one introduction. Where's Ed Redfern? Ed? Ed's over here. Ed, come out where people can see you. Ed's been working at the World Food Prize for about 28 years, even before it moved to Des Moines and that. So let us, a big round of applause for Ed Redfern. So the first part of the program is the presentation to the laureates of their diploma. Norm Borlaug, when we first came, said, when I got the Nobel Prize, I got a diploma. We should have a diploma. So, what Norm wanted, Norm got. And we created this diploma, and we've been presenting it ever since. So I want to invite our laureate. We've been doing everything together, but we want to do this separately. So and then we'll take a picture together at the end. But let me first invite Lawrence Haddad to come up and. Oh, you can come up the stairs over here. The laureates. They're every year. They're incredible, but got to have the script. All right. Come here in the middle. Thank you.
All right. Wow, thank you. Thank you, sir. Oh, it's the right one. And now David Nabarro. Thank you. So, and, John has the check, so.
Yeah. David, you here? No, here. So, this is when the laureate lecture takes place. And I asked the laureates, well, who wants to go first and this? And then we talked about it and said they'd enjoy having a conversation. And I just remembered in 2008, we had a conversation with George McGovern and Bob Dole. It was just so incredible. So I called up Catherine Bertini because she moderated that. And I said, could you ever come back and do it again? Could you lead the discussion, do the interview, moderate this fireside chat here? So please join me in welcoming the 2003 World Food Prize laureate, Catherine Bertini.
David.
Sorry, can you sit here? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Quinn. It is a real thrill to be here with these two laureates and, yes, to come back to a role that I had 10 years ago with Senators McGovern and Dole. And they were honored with the World Food Prize because of their work on child nutrition and specifically on school feeding. So it's fascinating that now, a decade later, the prize is come to, and the committee has decided to highlight the important role of nutrition for children, but really nutrition worldwide. And the fact that it has now this platform by virtue of the decision by the prize committee is extremely important for not only all of us who are working in this field, but we all believe for the entire world. And secondarily, that the committee has chosen to honor these two people as the World Food Prize laureates. You've heard from them in different fora this week. You've seen them last night. And I think you know what high regard not only the prize committee has for them, but their colleagues all over the world have, and how proud we all are that these two people were chosen for this prize. It's a universally popular decision because they've been so impactful in the work, but also because they're really, really nice people. So thank you. Last night, each of you, David and Lawrence, talked a little bit about how you got here. But we'd all always like to feel like we know you just even a little bit better. So I'd like to ask, and maybe David will start with you and go to Lawrence, for you just to describe, and a little of this gets back to last night, but describe what was the aha moment? I mean, when was it in your life that you said, this is what I'm going to do because I know it's going to make a difference? You started, David, as a young activist, for instance, and so you wanted to be involved in it. But what then made you decide that this work on nutrition was absolutely critical?
So that's Catherine, first of all, thank you, and thanks everybody for coming along. This is another great moment in our journey of the week. And the journey of a week is a little bit like the journey of life, that there is never really, in my life, been one aha moment. It's been in steps. And so, Catherine, if you don't mind, I'd like to just very briefly explain what I mean. At each different stage of my life, as I've become more convinced that we need to work harder on nutrition as an issue of local, national, and global importance, I've thought to myself, I want to see if I can find ways to achieve greater impact. And so when I was working in Nepal for a non-governmental organization, I remember working with the leaders of that organization and saying, it's not enough just to be running individual projects. We need to find ways to establish centers where we can learn, and then we can teach, and we can inspire others to take the message forward that you can't do child health without focusing on nutrition. A little bit like what we've been discussing in the last panel this morning. And then I was able to get a position in a university in the UK. And I was working with others in the London School of Tropical Medicine. And I remember engaging with the British government. At that time, it wasn't even called DFID, and seeing whether we could get more focus on nutrition within DFID's policies and programs. And we just managed to make small penetration. As Lawrence pointed out later, it wasn't enough. But that was another step. And then, again, when I got into the United Nations system, thinking we really have to change the way in which nutrition is done there. And so in these various steps, it's partly my own determination to do more, but that's never enough. We all know of people who are keen and who want to see change. And so the second part of it is realizing that the context is right, the moment is right, there are people who are ready to act, there's an opportunity to act, there may be a change in government, which means that there's new energy. And that's really what's led to the aha moments, Catherine. I've always wanted to do this, but I've tended to move from one level to the next, from one set of actions to the next, when I've found people who are ready to work on the issue, and also a context that makes it possible, usually a political change or some money becoming available or something like that.
So you had a strong view about the issues, but when you found the moment to pounce, you pounce.
That's exactly it. It's a bit what some of you may have heard me say this. I think in life, you have to have a clear strategy for what you want to do. And my strategy was to try to get nutrition more central into child health, into development, and then into national capacity building. But I was always looking for opportunities, as you see, the pounce moment, to actually advance it. So I've always combined strategy in this hand and opportunism in that hand. And then I squeeze the words together, and it becomes the word stropism. So I am a dyed-in-the-wool stropist and work in that way.
I want to highlight this point, especially getting back to all the students that are here, high school, college, graduate students, because this pounce moment is really important. You have issues that you really, really care about, but you can't always move them forward. You can always do more research, you can always do more speeches, but you have to be ready for the time when the political environment is right to pounce. So thank you for that.
I love that term, pounce moment. Take it away, everybody. Catherine's pounce moment is the one to remember.
Well, it's your pounce moment, but Lawrence, I'm going to go back to the aha moment or the pieces of your career that really made you successful and to the point where you're here today.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, David. Thank you guys for being here. It's like David. It's a series of moments. You've heard quite enough probably about my early life last night, but I was struck when I was doing that speech how many of your values are established very early on in life, and how that is a real guide to you. It helps you not so much figure out what you want to do, but it helps you figure out how you're going to do it and the rules of life that you will apply to yourself and you will expect other people to apply as well. So my early life was very important. The second part really was spending time in a small village outside of a small town, Maramag, in a small province, Bukidnon, in a large but remote island of the Philippines called Mindanao. I hope some of you know it. And this was in the mid-1980s, and I lived in the house of the midwife in the village, and I got to see a lot of the things that she dealt with, some of the very distressing things that she dealt with, and some of the very joyous things that she dealt with, and that was the second kind of aha moment for me. When I when I got my PhD and became a researcher, thank you. I became a researcher at IFPRI. We were in Pears Division. I was with Howdy and a bunch of other people. And we were in the division that was focusing on food consumption and nutrition. And there were other parts of the institute, well, you know, markets and trade, that kind of stuff, and production. And we could never get in our division where we were focusing on food consumption and nutrition, we could never get the other guys, the other economists in the other three divisions to pay attention to nutrition. And I remember many of our annual program reviews, we would have these, you know, everyone would say what they were doing every year. And a bunch of our trade economists would say, well, you know, nutrition, it's a really nice little kid, you know, a nice little outcome. You're just running around pinching kids' arms and you know, seeing whether there's a nice little outcome of development. And that really made me actually, not furious, but it really challenged me and made me challenge my intellectual energy and my research energy to say, you know, because I knew, I'd seen it in the midwife's work in the village. I'd seen the fact that nutrition is a driver of development. It's a driver of hope. It's not just a nice outcome to have. That was my second moment. And I guess the third moment, and my final one, Catherine, is the final sort of opportunity to pounce, if you like, was when I was director of the Institute of Development Studies. And so IDS and Overseas Development Institute are the two premier think tanks on development in the UK. And we were very, I don't know if we were very influential, but we had a lot of access to the UK government. And in the wake of the food price crisis, so 2007, 2008, I was invited in my role as director of IDS to go and meet with the Select Committee. The Select Committee is a group of MPs in the UK that hold DFID, the Department for International Development in the UK, to account. And they were having a retreat, and they were saying, what are the issues we are going to put on the table for the next year that we are going to challenge DFID on? And there were sort of 2 or 3 other leaders of development organizations there, and they gave a really long shopping list. And, you know, I was head of an organization that did 10 different things: climate, education, governance, you name it, environment. And I just went in there and I said, well, there's just one thing I want you guys to focus on, and that is nutrition. And so I had 15 minutes to make the case with them. And I think it was quite, you know, it wasn't the only thing, but it was really, it contributed to DFID, it contributed to a report from this Select Committee that put huge pressure on DFID to do more in nutrition. It wasn't just me, it was lots of other people, but when you have the opportunity and you have the evidence, you can make things happen. So.
I'm going to go to David for a minute, but Perry must be really proud. David.
So just listening to Lawrence last night, I was really intrigued when he talked about his outrage that built up, particularly in the early phase of his life. And he doesn't come across as a guy who's burning with outrage. So I thought I can learn so much from Lawrence, because what I think he's done, and it took me a long time to learn to do this, but I think I've also learned to do it, is you have this outrage and anger, often because you've seen horrendous things happening and you've not had the power to stop them. But when you're then trying to persuade others to act, you have to be super careful what you do with that outrage. Because if you go to a head of a government development department or to a minister and you say, I'm really frustrated, horrified, angry because I saw these children who were getting really sick or dying because of malnutrition, and you present it with your own anger and outrage right at the front, they can turn off super fast. So part, I think, of what has mattered to me, and I sense that Lawrence has become really skilled at it, is that capacity to take that outrage, but to bottle it up, but then use the energy that it creates to be really quite tactical about how you're going to bring about change. I don't know whether that's true. Am I right?
You've got to channel it. You've got to channel it, control it, and then unleash it at the right moment. And you've got to be patient about when you do that, and really savvy about that. And I've learned a lot from David about
But
when to pounce.
You can't unleash it
No.
like you're letting a dog off the leash. You've got to unleash it in a really, really cool way. I mean, the people I really, really admire are those who've got the anger, but they never let on in meetings or whatever the anger they feel. And they're the ones who get the furthest.
Well, you know, the dean, there was a wonderful panel, the first panel this morning, and the dean from Cornell said one thing you have to do is to make yourself be understated with your first response sometimes. And I thought that was a great way to start, at least. But what you both are talking about are some basic kind of salesmanship skills. And if you want to sell something, you have to find out what the person whom you want to buy it from you needs.
Yeah.
So what is going to motivate them? And I think, Lawrence, that sounds like what you did when you went to see the members of Parliament, because you understood what they were looking for, broadly
Well,
speaking.
they were really under pressure to demonstrate, sorry to interrupt you,
Go ahead.
Catherine, but they were really under pressure to demonstrate impact at a human level at that point in time. And what better way of demonstrating impact at a human level than to invest in malnutrition? So it resonated for that reason.
Right, absolutely. And I think one of the things that our laureates have in common is that three of the things. They're impactful, they have been impactful, they still are, they're pragmatic, and they're science-based. So in either of the cases in which, both of your cases, you got involved showing people why something was in their benefit, or why something was in society's benefit and therefore in their benefit as well. So that science is often missing from public policy. And that's really one of the places where you have been able to figure out how this works. So where should we go in terms of trying to marry policy and science? And I know students also think about this sometimes. Gee, I'm in the lab. Gee, I'm writing, I'm doing a lot of work on whatever my specialty is, but I'm not a policy person. How do I connect the science with the policy in an impactful way? David, you want to take a shot at that?
Yes, well, thank you. So science is the heart of just about everything that people in this room are doing in their professional lives. Evidence is essential. But the trick is to find the way to locate that evidence into a decision-making situation in a way that, as Catherine has just said, the listener feels, right, that's giving me something that's helpful. And I do think that in our journey to get nutrition taken more seriously, we took advantage of anxiety in 2008 and 2009, when food prices rose by 30%, this is particularly wheat and rice, and we were seeing numbers of undernourished children in particular rising very dramatically. And the impact of that on leaders of governments all over the world was actually quite dramatic, because they'd got used to malnutrition numbers dropping. And the people who were perhaps the most anxious were leaders of countries that had previously been moving well, and they were saying, what's going on? So by linking the scientific evidence on what was happening and its potential consequences to these concerns that were coming through, we were in a position to help get much broader political attention to nutrition, not so much from the ministers and prime ministers of wealthier nations, but actually from the leaders of emerging nations, Indonesia, Thailand, South Africa, Peru, Colombia, all anxious that the worsening nutritional state of their people would play through to economic and social outcomes. So the science on what the outcomes of malnutrition could be became very, very important in a relatively tight window of opportunity between 2008 and 2009.
Lawrence, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think, thank you, Catherine. For researchers and the young researchers in the House, I think the really key thing is to remember that research is just, it's not an end. It's a means to an end. I think it's really hard to remember that sometimes when you're in an academic institution and all your supervisors or your professors or your deans or your proposal review boards are saying, publish, 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 publish. Yes, do that, but always remember it's for a purpose. And even the most basic research or most profound sort of relationship research has very powerful implications. I remember a piece of work that I did with Howdy Buis when we were looking at a really fundamental issue. If income goes up by 10%, how much does calorie consumption go up by? Does it also go up by 10%? And we were astonished at how unresponsive calorie intakes were to income increases. 10% increase in income led to a 1% increase in calories. So you think, well, that's nice, but what's the implication of that? Well, the implication is those kind of ratios, whether it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-10, are used by the Food and Agriculture Organization to estimate the numbers that we're all talking about, the 821 million. So every piece of work that you do, whether it's highly practical or fairly foundational, will have an impact. And I think will have a use and an impact. I think we always have to remember that. And one of the things I didn't say last night, because I didn't have time, was I've been really fortunate to be at universities and institutions that don't just tolerate that connection of disciplines and evidence and action. They support it, and actually they demand it. But I think it's something you grow into. You can't do it in maybe your first decade of research, but in your second decade, you have a responsibility to build your own career in your first decade, to build your field in your second decade, and the third decade, really, you're out there changing the world completely. And that, to me, that's the trajectory I've tried to follow.
That's a brilliant way to think about it, by the decade. Thank you very much. Lawrence, what are we really talking about when we're talking about adequate nutrition, and how important is it that we're connecting that to what we actually consume?
Well, David and I yesterday, I don't know if you noticed, we were wearing socks yesterday that had dots on them, both of us. And we did that, it was our little inside joke, because we like to connect dots, both of us. And we've been having fun with this week. And connecting the dots is what malnutrition is all about, connecting the sectors, connecting the actors. And at the moment, we're faced with this malnutrition issue situation where you've got these two worlds converging and beginning to overlap. You've got the undernutrition world, where you have hunger, you have micronutrient deficiency, and you have now this other world where you're having increasing overweight, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. And they're converging, and they offer massive opportunities for new alliances, new resource mobilization, new, to use David's term, constructive clamor. Huge opportunities for that, because many of the people in power actually know people who are affected by obesity and diabetes and hypertension and heart disease. So for them, the people in power, it's a reality. It's not just an abstraction of people over there who are stunted and wasted and anemic. So, and at the center of all of that is diet, what we consume. And before I got here, I was looking up the Iowa statistics. And if you add up all the mortality and morbidity in Iowa, and I didn't do this, the World Health Organization has done this with an institute in Seattle. You add up all the mortality and morbidity in Iowa, and then you look at all the risk factors that are associated with that. They do the top 10 risk factors. 5 of the top 7 risk factors are related in one way or another to diet. So diet is at the core of everything, so that's a real opportunity, but diets are really hard to shift. It's about demand creation, which is really hard. It's about supporting companies, farms, NGOs that want to make nutritious food not 10% cheaper, but 10 times as cheap. And it's about creating enabling environments. What can governments do to not just put in sticks to beat companies who are doing the wrong thing, but carrots to support the companies that want to do the right thing. So I think that's the kind of place we're at, and then food systems is a fantastic organizational framework for all of that, and David's been leading a lot of work in this area on that.
So maybe we should think about the health data as well, based on what you've said in this cost that every government has to pay, and not only in actually out-of-pocket expenses to treat those non-communicable diseases, but also in terms of the cost of the economic loss.
We can have conversations with health people talking about the burden of disease, and they never talk about diet. So I think, you know, we often think, David and I talk about making things nutrition sensitive. We probably need to make the health sector more nutrition sensitive. Indeed. And then there's a massive economic cost. The vice president of Peru was also, who you saw yesterday, was also a minister of finance, and we were talking to her about, you know, how do you convince ministers of finance, not just ministers of agriculture and health, but ministers of finance, the guys and women who hold the purse strings. And she said, you know, the evidence matters. Ministers of finance are economists. They care about this sort of stuff, and we know that 10% of GDP is lost because of burdens of stunting. We know that the benefit-cost ratios of scaling up nutrition programs are 16 to 1. Every dollar you put in to scaling up a nutrition program, you get 16 back. It's better than the returns to the Dow Jones Index of the last 50 years. So these economic cases resonate.
David.
So the evidence is key, but it's not sufficient.
Absolutely.
Once we've got the evidence, then we have to find ways to build the community of actors who are ready to make an extra effort and try to bring about change. And that means that part of this activity that we're involved in requires us to get out of our comfort zones and work with people who we don't normally sit down with, we don't normally talk to, we don't normally engage with. They're not in our Facebook group. So that perhaps for me has been the most important evolution in the last 30 years. It's so easy to go to meetings, talk with people who've got similar mindsets, leave the meeting at the end and say, we'll meet each other again in 6 months' time or a year's time, and know that we're still going to feel that we're on the outside trying to push our issue in, and we're not going to get anywhere. And the first group I've already mentioned that really has got excited about nutrition is people in government, not usually in the health ministry, not usually in the agriculture ministry, but in the Ministry of Finance or the office of the Prime Minister or President, because they've grown to understand that good nutrition leads to much greater national performance, poor nutrition leads to real costs, as Lawrence has said. Now, the next group that are getting really interested are people in business. Not just any old business, but people in the business of agriculture and food. Because they're seeing that in 10 years' time, they're going to face many challenges if they go on producing food that is outrageously bad for people. Now, we're not there yet, but we're beginning to find business leaders who are talking our language. And I want to stress that for me, this is a really important development, because actually government ministers and leaders do listen an awful lot to business leaders, especially if those business leaders have shown that they are responsible, transparent, and accountable. And last point is that on the science, I do hope that when thinking about doing science on these issues, we're prepared to apply behavioral science and other social sciences to actually look at experiences with trying to encourage policy change, so that we're learning from the kind of exercises in which many of us in this room are involved, and we're writing it up. We may not be able to do randomized controlled trials of policy change experiments, but we can at least use good scientific analysis to write case studies and also to develop hypotheses, because these can be really helpful when we share them with each other. There are one or two people in this room, for example, Jane Nelson, who we heard this morning, who have got really good at doing that, and their material is actually, for me, some of the most useful material around on how you can make change happen through partnering.
Well, let's talk about business for a minute. There are a lot of business leaders here, and certainly the World Food Prize Foundation has been aggressive in recruiting business involved in these discussions, so that we've always had multi-sectoral discussions on this stage. But the nutrition community has not always. And David, you mentioned earlier that you had to change some of the ways the UN thought about nutrition. Lawrence and I worked together once upon a time on the UN System Standing Committee on Nutrition, which I chaired for 4 years. And the people on the committee were UN agencies, donor governments, and NGOs. And everyone, except Lawrence, I think, well, I know Lawrence, but except for only a couple of people, seem to be allergic to the idea of working with the private sector. So I believe probably also there are private sector people who don't really quite know how to work with these NGOs and the civil society crowd either. So Lawrence, you've been on the forefront of this. What kind of advice do you have for how we bridge this gap and work better together?
Thanks, Catherine. I kind of got three messages on this. I think the first message is not to business. It's to people outside of business in the public sector who care about nutrition and food security. I don't have many regrets. I'm a karaoke guy. I love karaoke. So the biggest song in karaoke is "I Did It My Way" by Frank Sinatra. Right? And so one of the key lines is regrets. I've had a few. I haven't had many regrets in life, but one of the regrets in life I've had is that it took me so long to properly engage with the private sector. And those of you in the audience who are a lot younger than me, I would encourage you not to wait until you're in your early 50s to figure that one out. That's my first message. To businesses in the audience, I would say there are lots of people out there who want to work with you outside of business. There are lots of people who value what you do. There are lots of people who see business as a very heterogeneous group of people, not as a monolith. There are a lot of people who see you as essential, not a nice add-on, but essential to achieving the SDGs. And David and I are firmly in that camp. But I have another message for you. And the other message for you is don't be on the wrong side of history. Because this movement to have healthier food, food that is more environmentally sustained, is not going away. And it's gonna gain strength at exponential speed. And you don't have the luxury, even if you tried, of doing good things in Europe and North America and less good things elsewhere in the world, because with social media and instant media, you're not going to have that luxury. So those of you who really believe in improved nutrition, there's lots of people out there who want to work with you. My organization, GAIN, is one of them. We're sensitive to the fact that your business models were established in a completely different era. And so you can't just abandon that business model. You've got to transition it, and transitioning takes time. The only thing I think we would, and we want to support your transition, and we do. We work with many companies to support that transition. But the only thing we really want you to do in that is to make commitments, make them real commitments, say how much you're going to do, by when you're going to do it, and let all of us, let the world be able to monitor that and see how you're doing. And that's why I asked the question this morning in the panel for our colleague from PepsiCo. So I think the tide has really turned on engaging with the private sector, and I think it's turning on both sides, and it requires more of us to make those connections. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't work, but we need to try.
David, you've been outspoken on this too. Would you add some thoughts?
I'm outspoken on the two sides, really, and I love the way Lawrence has just put it. Those of us who've worked in the public sector need to have the courage to engage with business, even though sometimes we will find that we're working against the tide, because there's still a strange suspicion of the business community in some governments. And that's because of a perception that business has this profit-making bottom line and is sometimes ruthless in pursuing that bottom line and sees doing good for people and the planet as a sort of extra add-on. Now, what I have learnt is from many business leaders in the last 5 years is that they actually don't have that dichotomous view. And particularly in the space of agriculture and food, they know that they will not have viable business models unless they can demonstrate that they are unequivocally good for people and planet. And I think we're going to, as Lawrence has suggested, see more signs of that coming through in commitments for which they're prepared to be held to account. The most profound test is going to be in relation to unequivocal support for breastfeeding. That's the kind of lightning rod issue in nutrition. And I think we're going to see some interesting developments there, where companies that actually make their money, and it's a lot of money, from breast milk substitutes, will find themselves feeling the need to demonstrate an absolutely unequivocal commitment to enabling women to breastfeed for the early months of their babies' lives. On the other side, I just want to stress that it does usually take businesses some time to make the switch from having corporate social responsibility programs as a kind of way of looking good, as a PR thing, to actually having sustainability, nutrition, and human well-being built in to the totality of their business model so that it's part of their company purpose. And often we find inside businesses that the progress is a bit uneven. Some groups are ready to make the shift, but up at the CEO or board level, there's a bit of difficulty. And so I think we mustn't rush to judge on the basis of what we see in a single cross-sectional moment of time. We have to look at the trends and the indicators, and sometimes understand that even within the companies, there are pretty massive disputes between different parts of the companies as to how they're going to cope with their wish to be unequivocally good for people and planet.
While we're talking about sectors, you've both touched on this, but just briefly, can we talk about agriculture sector and health sector? I've often thought that nutrition is the unwanted stepchild of the two of them.
Well, lost by either side.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, either it's lost and agriculture ministries don't pay attention, health ministries don't pay attention, medical schools don't pay enough attention, agriculture schools may or may not, but it doesn't get into all of the appropriate lines of work. And where does it sit? On the other hand, sometimes the ministries say, well, you can't do nutrition because it's my job. In agriculture, you can't do it because it's health's job. But then health doesn't do it and vice versa. So you've talked about finance, but what do we do about those people?
So when I was at IDS, we used to invite every month leading NGOs to come and talk to us. And I had a leading NGO from India, a CEO of a leading NGO from India. And he came, and it's a really fantastic NGO, and they were doing lots of stuff in education and climate, but nothing on nutrition. So I said to him, why aren't you doing anything on nutrition in India? And he said, because there's no one to shout at. There's no one to rail against. I don't know who's in charge on nutrition. I've got no one to, there's no focal point in India on nutrition. This was 10 years ago. So, you know, it really highlighted to me the fact that the accountability is very weak in nutrition. How can a Minister of Health and a Minister of Agriculture get away with ignoring nutrition? And so that's why I think David and I, in various ways, have been trying to promote accountability in nutrition and trying to make it easy for both sides, health and agriculture, to do things that are nutrition sensitive. And there are loads and loads of things they can do. I mean, farmers know, and people within food systems know, you have to make hundreds of decisions, and each of those decisions has a consequence for nutrition. So it's not that there aren't things to do. We in the nutrition community need to make it easy for people in agriculture to know what to do. And just like when we're looking for overlaps of commerce and nutrition, which are there, we have to look for overlaps of productivity and nutrition, of universal health care and nutrition. And Howdy Bourse's work with Jan Lowe and others, and Maria and Robert, they have beautifully squared that circle. They have said, here's a way of achieving agriculture goals and nutrition goals. Now, I don't believe that's a one-off. I believe there are lots of other ways of doing that. I was in Japan a month ago, and we were talking with the Japanese government, who are hosting the G20 summit next year. And they are making universal health care the centerpiece of that G20. And no one was talking about diet. And diet, as I've told you, is in every country, whether it's Iowa's not a country yet, whether it's Iowa, India, Iceland, Indonesia, beautiful. Diet is always one of the top 5, top 6 risk factors for the burden of disease. So, you know, we basically, David and I are 2 people. There are hundreds and thousands of others out there doing the same thing, making it easy for people in other sectors to do things that are nutrition sensitive, holding them to account if they don't, and then trying to push the whole discussion up, whether it's in government or in business, pushing the discussion up to the people who stand to gain the most and stand to lose the most from a disconnect.
David.
So you wanted us to be brief. I wonder how many people in this room would call themselves nutritionists, just quickly. Yeah, a few. Thank you very much.
We're not.
I just want to say what I'm asking for and what we're asking for is really a big challenge to nutritionists. Please make certain that you enable others to take the heart of your professional discipline and absorb it into their own work. So encourage everybody you know who's working on agriculture and food to become a nutritionist. Encourage everybody you know who's working in health to be a nutritionist. Invite them to develop policies and programs that are nutrition sensitive everywhere. And then the subject and the issues will get much wider ownership.
Wonderful. We're going to come back to that point in a couple of minutes. We've just got about 8 minutes left. So I have, Ambassador Quinn, you won't be surprised that I have to ask you both about the critical role of women and girls in this space. And what can we expect when we think about these policies, and why it's important not only from their medical perspective, but from their leadership roles in households and communities.
I can start, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
My PhD thesis was about gender disparities between boys and girls and women and men within households, and you often find girls and women eat least and eat last, and they also eat worst, they eat the worst food. So there's, and why is that? It's because of gender asymmetries in power between men and women. And power is a topic that we find quite difficult to talk about in development and in agriculture and in nutrition. But I think both David and I yesterday in our remarks mentioned the word injustice and justice. And development is about power relationships, and nutrition is about power relationships. And unfortunately, in many countries, they are very asymmetrical between men and women. So it's not just the outcomes that differ between men and women in terms of nutrition. It's not just that men and women have different needs. It's that men and women have different access to the levers of power. Very interesting. We did a lot of research in the 80s with my colleague Agnes Kisomping, and we said when men and women are married and they come to the marriage, if a woman brings more assets to the marriage, she has a much greater say in decisions that are made post-marriage. So that just shows you the raw, naked power plays that happen within households. You may not think they do, but they do. And they don't happen in my household, Frederic, but they do happen. And you know, when resources are scarce, it's even more tight. So how do we change that? You know, I think that's a challenge. It's representational. That matters, of course. GAIN just completed a gender. We were contacted by an organization called 50/50, Gender 50/50, and it's a kind of an audit of your organization on how you're doing on gender. And there were 7 categories, and we did really well on 4 categories. Okay on 1, and not very well on 2. And so I'm kind of deeply embarrassed by that, and we've made a set of commitments about what we can do to change that by March of next year, and it's public commitment. And I think representation matters, but I think the key thing is in schools and early on in life. And I think what I've been really pleased about is the youth program. It seems to be about 50/50 boys and girls, maybe even more girls than boys. And until the agency of women is fully realized, we will never solve the problem of malnutrition. I'll give you one final comment and then I'll stop. I was talking with the Vice President of Peru yesterday, and she was saying that the top issue in her country is anemia. And anemia affects many more women than it affects men. And I've written many articles about our amnesia about anemia. It seems to be a forgotten issue. And I don't have the evidence to back it up, but I bet if more men had anemia than women, it would be solved pretty damn quickly.
David?
So, as I understand it, women actually enable food systems to work everywhere, whether it's producing, processing, marketing, using food to feed others, and making household decisions about food and diet. Mostly women. And so the future of food systems and nutrition has to be a future that listens to, responds to, and empowers women. Otherwise, this will not work.
Thank you. I have a closing kind of call to arms question I want to ask you, but before we get to that, we didn't talk about the SDGs, and I know, David, you're a champion of these, and so please, in a very short period, can you say why nutrition is important to the SDGs?
Some of you may see that I wear a little wheel on my lapel. I don't know whether it shows up on the video. This is a wheel with 17 spokes on it. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are represented by the colors. What happened was that between 2012 and 2015, through a 3-year process of consultation, negotiators from around the world came together to agree the plan for the future of the world and her peoples. And this came out as the 17 Sustainable Development Goals wrapped up in a thing called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's the only plan that we've got for the future. And within that, nutrition has a very strong position. It's inside Goal 2, which relates to zero hunger and sustainable food systems. But there is an absolute understanding by all who work on this agenda that we cannot possibly have a sustainable long-term future for humanity without food systems that enable people to be well nourished with food that is delivered in a way that is sustainable and at the same time is mitigating climate change. So I do hope that those of you who haven't found out about the 2030 agenda go and have a look at it and appreciate that nutrition and nourishment cuts right across this and is key to our common future.
Thank you very much. We had some advice already that both of you gave to students, to researchers, and to everyone here. In fact, that I think maybe everybody should be a nutritionist, right? Not just those who raised their hands. David,
Absolutely.
is that
yeah.
part of what you said?
I would like to come back next year. Who's a nutritionist? Like to see 100% of hands up and a commitment to take this battle forward. Yeah.
And what else shall we do? This crowd here, the people watching this video, what should we do? What should we do if we're in civil society, if we're in government, if we're in private sector, if we're scientists, if we're development partners in the UN system or NGOs? Where should we go? What shall we do? Lawrence and then David.
Well, I used to do a lot of work on information, and people would say information is power. But actually power shapes information, as we're seeing in your country and our country as well. So my plea to you is to connect nutrition and power. Understand that power shapes nutrition outcomes, and understand how that power, where that power comes from, and how to navigate that power, and actually how to develop your own power, whether it's individually or collectively, preferably both. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing is, when you're engaging in those conversations with people who are powerful, and when you're building your own power bases, remember to convince them that not only does power shape nutrition, but nutrition shapes power. It shapes the power to survive, the power to learn, the power to thrive, the power to generate income, and the power to fulfill human destiny.
Super fast. I actually totally understand what Lawrence is saying and would like to encourage you to do that, but I'm also wanting to add to it. We've seen a big shift in where nutrition sits internationally since 2010 because of a multi-stakeholder movement that has grown in more than 60 countries and in much of the country of India. And I therefore would like to complement the importance of engaging with those in power by encouraging you to see yourselves cementing and growing a popular movement that has nutrition in every aspect of life and development. And there are kind of 4 key words. The first is to agitate, not in an oppressive way, but just simply talk about it wherever you can. Secondly, collaborate. Work with others, because united we stand, divided we fall. Thirdly, communicate, as Lawrence said, because you have to be able to explain. And finally, motivate those that you're working with to do more and to do it better. And when we return, we'll see how that movement is getting on.
Now, these people are really amazing, aren't they? Absolutely terrific. Aren't you proud?
So are you. So are you.
As Ambassador Quinn comes up here, I have to say one thing about their attire, however. I didn't know they were going to do this connect the dots thing with their socks, but we did notice that they had the Wagenhagen ties on both the same day, and then they had the socks. Well, I've seen David before with these different kind of colored socks. He's very subdued today. He has striped blue socks. And so I wanted to bring him some food socks.
Ah.
So I brought him some banana socks so
Brilliant.
he can wear it another time.
It's good for my potassium. Very good.
And then I contacted the Gain office and said, does Lawrence wear a different kind of socks? And they said, no, he has more subdued socks. And I said, well, they didn't know about the polka dots yesterday. So I said, well, tell me something else important about Lawrence. Well, he really likes Manchester United.
Oh, wow.
So Manchester
Excellent.
United socks.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
What a great conversation. Let's have a round of applause for our laureates, for Catherine Bertini. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was
Now,
Great job.
yes. Nobody move. Everybody stay, please. And that we, yeah, you can move. And that was truly wonderful. So we have our expert Youth Institute experts. We want them to get out on their way. So I could ask your indulgence to just remain where you are. I do want to mention one additional person who is at the heart of everything that happened this week, at the center of all of the planning, everything that took place, everything that worked seamlessly. That is our Vice President, Mashal Hussain. Mashal, where are you? I hope you're here. And that, where's Mashal? Mashal's gone. I was going to say she's there for everything, and that, but can we have a round of applause for Mashal? And so if you could indulge us, we want to let our students and experts out. Morgan is going to have them go, and if you don't mind, just stay put for a couple of minutes, and then everyone will be on their way. Thank you again so much for being here. And to our two laureates and Catherine, what a wonderful, wonderful program.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I know that everyone in the room is truly an expert in their own way, but